Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I begin in the name of God. Indeed, all praise belongs to Him. And we send peace and blessings upon His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum, and may peace be upon all of you as well. I'm going to be just straight up honest with all of you. I don't do a lot of interfaith events. Mostly when I'm speaking, I'm speaking to a Muslim crowd. One of my kind of gripes with interfaith events is that oftentimes I feel like interfaith events are geared towards making sure that we all kind of pat each other on the back and say, you know, we all are exactly the same and we agree on everything and so on and so forth. And I don't think that's a productive conversation. I believe that it is normal and natural and is part of being a human being that God has created us all to be different, and we're going to have differences. And there's no getting around that. So the purpose of interfaith events should really be to reach out and to learn to work with people despite our differences. And I often give the example of, you know, talking about different communities and different faiths. Even if we look at relationships, there's no two people who are exactly the same. Those of you who are married or in a relationship, you know that even in a relationship, two people are different, no matter how compatible we may be, or no matter how much we try to marry someone who is exactly like us, or whatever the case may be, we soon come to realize that being a human being, we are different. And the only way that this relationship or this marriage is going to survive is when we learn to work with each other, despite us being different. Even, you know, I've talked to couples who got married and they have the same cultural background, they belong to the same religion, they even grew up like 2 blocks from one another, and their parents have known each other from the very first day, and they're like, we're going to have the most amazing marriage ever, and we've known each other forever, everything's going to be great. But they soon come to realize that even though they thought they were very, very similar, there were little things that were different. And the marriage, really making that marriage successful, was about really learning how to work with one another, and learning how to not only survive, but in a relationship, love one another. And I think that's a microcosm for our communities as well. So the purpose of an interfaith event, the purpose of something like this, which I think is a beautiful thing, I'm like so happy. Like I said, I don't do a lot of these, but I'm so happy to see such a big turnout and so many people come out. The purpose of something like this really has to be building empathy, right? And I firmly believe that if the solution to differences is not to try and make everyone the same, is not to try and force everyone to believe the same thing, right? And that only leads to problems, and it only leads to chaos. And you know, even if you look at the political climate today in America, even if we were to like simplify and say the right and the left, I believe we spend far too much time trying to force other people to adopt our beliefs and our point of view. If we only took a step back and tried to empathize with people, tried to understand where they're coming from, then maybe we could work together despite us being different. And oftentimes, you know, I think about some of the issues that have you know, kind of plagued, or they have taken over the political debates, and people, you know, year after year after year, you know, we argue these issues, you know, issues like pro-life and pro-choice and gun control or whatever it may be. And you know, now with Trump being our president, it seems like, and I know a lot of people, they you know, especially after Trump was elected, people had a very pessimistic, or some people had a very pessimistic outlook towards the future of America. And I know a lot of people, especially, I mean, those of you, you know, Muslims know this, but non-Muslims, you know, you may not know this, but a lot of Muslims were like, man, how do we get Canadian citizenship now, right? And like the ongoing joke was like, oh, you know, the immigration site for Canada closed down or whatever. And myself and some of our, you know, Muslim leaders, they stood up and said, no, this is not the time to run away. This is the time to, you know, really hunker down and say, look, this is our country and we need to fix it, right? And even now, the way, you know, we have progressed or regressed in some cases after Trump being elected, I often tell the Muslim community that we have a responsibility now. We can't go down the path that many people have gone down, and that is to simply mock and make fun of the other side. What has that really accomplished? How far have we really gotten? If there's someone who we disagree with, and we stand there and we make fun of them and we mock them and so on and so forth, and we belittle them and belittle what they deem to be important and what they deem to be, issues that affect their lives, then that's not gonna close the divide. All that's going to do is it's gonna make people, hold on even more to their beliefs and hold on to that division that is between us. And I often tell the Muslim community that we can't go down that path. So when we see someone, for example, making fun of the other side, or oftentimes people make fun of Trump supporters or whatever it may be, I'm like, look, that is not from the character of a Muslim. To begin with, we shouldn't mock and make fun of anyone. And then on top of that, if we're trying to solve these problems, if we're trying to unify this country, it's not by saying, oh, you're so dumb, you're so ridiculous, how can you believe things like this? It's to really build, it's to try and connect with people. There was a study done, I don't recall where it was done, which university it was, but they were studying empathy. And they brought people into a room and they tried to measure, how people empathize with one another. And they found that, two strangers, they brought them into a room, and basically it's a long study with a lot of details, but to spare you the details, they found that if two strangers came together in a room and just spent 10 to 15 minutes playing a video game together, that their level of empathy went up. And this is not them talking to one another or finding out about their beliefs and their background and what's important to them. This is just them sitting together and trying to solve a puzzle or to play a video game. And that changed the level of empathy that they had towards one another. So once again, I'll say, I don't believe that interfaith events and events like this or whatever, the goal is not to make you believe what I believe, right? The goal is not to make you agree with me. And when in 100% of the matters, the goal of something like this is to build empathy. The goal of this is really to connect with one another. And even within the Muslim community, just like many other faiths and just like many other communities, we have differences within our communities. Right? There's Muslims who disagree with one another. On the ride here, from where I'm staying at the university, I asked one of the brothers who was driving me, I said to him, and I'll explain this joke to you, to non-Muslims, but the Muslims will get it right away. I said, hey, what's the handshaking situation here? Right? And what that means is, and what I was asking him was, some Muslims are comfortable shaking hands with the opposite gender, and some Muslims are not, right? So some Muslims don't believe that you should have any physical contact with the opposite gender, and yet other Muslims are totally fine with it. And it was very interesting to me, and I didn't get a clear answer on that, and I didn't expect a clear answer. But to me, I really feel like we as a community, as Muslims, and even beyond that, as people of faith, and then as Americans and human beings. Once again, we have to really stop forcing people to fall into our belief system or where we are. We have to learn that people can have different opinions, right? And that's one of the beauties of belonging and living to this country. And I often talk about this, and I've lived in other parts of the world as well now. And one of the things that I'm most proud about when it comes to being an American is the fact that we can have people from so many different parts of the world. We can have people who belong to different faiths, or people who don't believe at all, people who don't believe in God, and we can accept the fact that we are different. And we can live together as long as we're not infringing on the rights of other people. I mean, that is the whole concept of a democracy, of a liberal democracy, is that I can have my beliefs and you can have your beliefs, and we may not agree on everything, and my morals may be different than your morals in certain matters or whatever, but as long as we are kind to one another, as long as we are good to one another, as long as we are there to serve one another and help one another, as long as we can build some empathy, as long as obviously we don't hurt one another, then of course we can survive. Not only can we survive, we can thrive. And I believe that in the years to come, post-Obama era, post-Trump era, I believe that America will be an example for the rest of the world, not because of our economic status or as our status as a military power or whatever it may be. I believe that just as America grew and learned from things like the civil rights movement, right? Yes, we're still dealing with some of those same issues. We're still dealing with racism and so on and so forth. But look at how much we have grown. Look at how much we have learned that we can now, offer to the rest of the world. And there's people, and I've spoken to people, leaders in the civil rights movement, for example. And I often ask them a question. I say, look, if you could go back and change it all, right? If you could go back and say, you know what, we didn't need a civil rights movement. People would just learn on their own. Would you do that? All that pain and suffering that you went through, and and I've spoken to people who stood out and marched and been hosed down and have dogs come attack them and so on and so forth, and they all say to me, that struggle was one of the most beautiful things I've done in my life. And that goes back to my faith. As a Muslim, we believe that God puts us through difficulty and hardship for many reasons, but one of the wisdoms of God in putting us through a difficult situation and putting us through a hardship is so that we can grow, so we can learn and become even better. And we consider actually the Arabic word for a trial is the word fitna. Right? It's the word fitna. And what it goes back to, and one of the meanings of that word is purification. That through a trial we are purified, not in the sense that when we go through a difficulty, we learn about who we are. Right? We learn about our reality. And I often say, I do some marriage counseling as well. That's why I tend to talk about marriage a lot. But I often tell young people, I say, look, if you really want to know the reality of the person that you're marrying, just spend some time with them in the car where someone cuts them off. Right? See how they deal with road rage, right? Because that's our gut reaction, right? That's who we are, and I've seen perfectly calm people, right, just lose it on the road, right? Why? And for me, the example of road rage, or the example of someone cutting us off on the road, it is such an amazing example of the bigger picture here. Because what happens when someone cuts us off on the road? Right? Are we thinking of the other person? Are we trying to empathize with them? Not at all. All we're thinking about, right, is us. Like, you could have ran me off the road. You almost hit me. You're such a bad driver. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the late George Carlin, a famous comedian. But he said it's really interesting that when you're on the road, anyone driving faster than you is a maniac, and anyone driving slower than you is an idiot, right? Because, right, there's no empathy there. Right? And one of my mentors once said to me, I was driving him in the car, and same thing, someone cut me off, or driving a little bit, no, sorry, they didn't cut me off. They were driving really slow. They were driving like 20 miles beneath the speed limit in the left lane, which is a big pet peeve of mine. I think this is a big lesson that America needs to learn. So if there's one thing you take away from my talk today, just remember, the left lane is the fast lane. It's for passing. Just kidding. All right. So in the left lane, this person's driving really, really slow. And my mentor, he started to see that I'm getting frustrated, and it was really bothering me, and I started to get closer and inch forward, and just anything, that kind of passive aggressive way of kind of dealing with it, like just inch closer or whatever. And he goes, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "Okay." He said, "The way you're feeling right now, how would you feel if that was your mom driving that car in front of you?" My mom's old. She's in her late 70s right now, but she still drives. And he said, "How would you feel if that was your mom driving the car in front of you?" Right? And I said, I thought about that, and immediately my heart filled with compassion. Right? Because I know my mom isn't the fastest driver, and I know sometimes she does that. Like, I've been in the car with her where she's in the left lane driving, so I'm like, "Mom, you need to move over." Right? But she's very careful in the way she drives and so on and so forth. And I immediately pulled off, and I backed off, and I realized the reason I was able to have that compassion was I could kind of maybe think about the plight of the other person. I could kind of think about what they're going through, and maybe there's something that caused them, or there's maybe a reason. And you know, one of the things we often say when speaking to people in the Muslim community, one of the topics we often talk about is a concept known as husn al-dhann, which basically means giving someone the benefit of the doubt. And part of our character as a Muslim is that we are supposed to give people the benefit of the doubt unless we are absolutely sure of the opposite, right? Unless you're 100% sure. And you know, one of our famous scholars, he said, give people 70 excuses. And the point isn't, and some Muslims take that literally, they go 1, 2, 3. The point isn't 70 excuses, the point is to give them as many excuses as possible. And when you run out of excuses, what you're supposed to say is, well, just because I can't think of an excuse doesn't mean they don't have an excuse. Right? And the whole point of that, once again, is to try and empathize with the person. One of the examples that I usually give to people is, there's a sentence, and this happens a lot online. You know, we have a hard time, you know, talking about empathy. It's easier to empathize with someone when they're in front of you. It's easier to empathize with people when you've had a conversation with them. It's easier to empathize with people when you've been in a room with them. But the more disconnected we are from people, the harder it is for us to empathize. And once again, that is the whole point of an event like this. But on the internet, that becomes especially highlighted. When, you know, someone is sitting behind their screen, you're sitting behind your screen, you don't know who this person is, they may not even have like their full name, their picture, maybe like this vague picture or whatever, and it's really hard to empathize with someone, and sometimes we read things and we take them the way we want to take them. We understand what people are saying according to our understanding, and if you want proof of that, then I'm gonna speak a sentence to you, and I want you to think about how many ways this sentence can be interpreted. And it's the following sentence. I never said she stole your money. Okay? I never said she stole your money. Or he, right? Equality and all that. Right? So, 7 words. Okay? 7 words. This sentence can be interpreted in 7 different ways, depending on which word you emphasize. Alright, so let's try that. I never said she stole your money. Meaning what? I didn't say it. Somebody else said it. Right? I never said she stole your money. Different meaning. I never said she stole your money. Meaning, I may have implied it. I may have, I may have hinted towards it, but I never said it. I never said she stole your money. Meaning what? I never said she stole it, but somebody else. I never said she stole your money. Meaning she didn't steal it, but she could have borrowed it, whatever. It could be something else. I never said she stole your money. Meaning what? It's either your money, someone else's money. I never said she stole your money. Right? She stole something else, but not your money. Right? And this is a sentence. This is one sentence that can be interpreted in 6 or 7 different ways. Now imagine the paragraphs and paragraphs that we read online. And I deal with this, by the way, on a constant basis. I'm one of those people who's very active online on Twitter and Facebook and so on and so forth. And it's very interesting to me that the type of world that we live in today, where if someone really wants to understand what you're saying in a bad way, they'll find an interpretation for it. And I've often tried this, and I did this with my students once. I did kind of like a mini social experiment with them, where I said, look, we're going to tweet something today, okay? And I want you to think of something which is the most politically correct, the nicest thing you can think of, and we'll put it online, and let's see if someone can come up with a bad interpretation for it, right? And we tried it, and most people were receptive and so on and so forth, but there was that one person I told my students, I said, remember, there's always this one person, I usually call them the exceptionist, where they find an exception to every single thing you post, right? Like, oh, you should be kind to your neighbor. Yeah, that's true, but what if your neighbor is really mean to you, right? Well, that's the exceptionist. That's the pessimist who will always find something wrong with what you're saying. And once again, this is a lack of empathy. This is where we can't empathize with the person. We can't feel what they're feeling. And talking about, I spoke about giving 70 excuses. I once had my students, when we were talking about this concept of giving people the benefit of the doubt, I said, let's take a look at a statement that you don't like. and everyone, we voted, and we came across one of our president's tweets, right, that he tweeted out. And it's like, why would he say something like this or whatever? And they're like, some of my students are like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I said, look, giving someone who you like the benefit of the doubt, that's not a challenge. That's not hard. That's NBD. That's no big deal, right? Like, who cares about that? Like, that doesn't mean anything. You haven't struggled. You haven't strived. And the concept that we have in Islam of jihad, but struggle, to strive, to really work hard for the sake of God and for the sake of your fellow human beings and so on. That's our spirituality, our connection with God. Part of it is a struggle. Right? It's not going to be easy. It's not always. Sometimes we have to go through, as I said earlier, we have to go through the hardship. We have to go through that difficulty in order for us to become better. So I said, look, because I know a lot of you don't like him, or you don't like what he has to say, that's why we have to do this. Right? That's why I'm not going to pick like your mom's tweet or something. Right? Because obviously you'd be able to find an excuse for her. You'd be able to find like, yeah, she didn't mean it, and she was having a bad day or whatever, this, that. And, sure enough, it took a while, but eventually we were able to make excuses for his tweet as well. And I know, even till the end of the exercise, everybody was uncomfortable. Right? Everybody's like, no, I don't feel good giving him the benefit of the doubt. But I told my students, I said, look, this is the only way that we're going to make progress. This is the only way that we're going to build bridges. This is the only way that we're going to come together. Because if you think that the solution is to make him agree with your point of view, or to make the other side, right, the right or the left or this or that, whatever side you stand on, if you think the solution is to force them to think the way you think, well, I'm sorry, that is never going to happen. It hasn't happened in the history of mankind or humankind, and it will not happen. There will be differences till the end of time. And the only way for us to live together and survive together and thrive together is to empathize with one another, is to learn about one another, is to say, look, maybe I don't agree with you, but at the very least I can sit and I can say, you don't have to agree with someone to be kind to them. Right? Just because you disagree with someone, it doesn't mean that our tone has to be bad. It doesn't mean that we have to be rude to the person. And that, I believe, is the solution. That, I believe, is the way forward for us, not only as Americans, not only as human beings, but even, I say this to the Muslim community. Right? Even, when it comes to coming together as a community. And I know I was asked to speak a little bit about spirituality and community. And for us as Muslims, community is a big part of our spirituality. That's why we have certain aspects of our spirituality that are tied into the community. There's no escaping it. For example, we have the congregational prayer. And actually, Muslims, we get together, or we're supposed to, 5 times a day to pray together. Right? 5 times a day. And we get together for the Friday sermon and the Friday prayer. And then we have the Eid celebration, twice a year. We have certain things that are communal things that are supposed to happen where we have to come together. And I often think about this because, I'll just be honest with you once again, I consider myself an introvert. I know that's ironic considering what I do, right? But I very much consider myself an introvert. I don't think of myself as a people's person. I often get what some introverts call a social hangover. I don't know if you know what that is. But that's basically after an event, right, or after, a night of being around a lot of people, like you feel hungover the next day. You're like, when I go home, I'm like, I just need time to myself. I just need to sit down with a comic book and a cup of coffee or whatever, just to be with myself, right? But I realized that if I was left up to myself, then I would never do what I do today. I would have never gone to study. I would have never gone out and spoken to audiences. I would have never engaged with the community and the broader community. It's when I started coming to the mosque, when I started to talk to people, because I had to, right? And it's part of our religion. There's certain things built into our spirituality, which I think is absolutely beautiful. That you have no choice. Like even as an introvert, there's certain things that I have to do. As a Muslim, it's part of my faith that I have to come and I have to talk to people. And that's one of the things that I'll, advise my Muslim brothers and sisters. And that is, you have a beautiful community here. And I was asking one of the brothers who was driving me today, like how many people come to the mosque and so on and so forth. And he said it's a small community, but it's growing and more people are turning out. And I really thought about this, and I said, the community is absolutely vital. Not only when it comes to dealing with trials and difficulties, we need one another, we need the support of one another, we need help from one another, but also in terms of our spirituality, if we're going to grow, we're going to grow together. We need one another. And one of the things that I say in my community as well, and that is that we have to be able to be that type of community that when we don't see a person for a while, that we become concerned, right? When someone didn't show up for a prayer or whatever, not because they have to pray and you want to make sure that they pray, that's between them and God. That's their relationship with God. But we have a responsibility towards them, and that is to see how they're doing, to make sure everything is okay, right? And actually, according to Islamic law, by the way, people have rights upon one another, right? So simply one Muslim to another Muslim, we have rights upon one another, and that is to make sure that we're okay to take care of one another. As a neighbor, we have rights upon our neighbors, and our neighbors have rights upon us, regardless of their faith, right? According to Islamic law, I don't know, some of you may know this, you may not, but our neighbor, according to Islamic law, they have certain rights upon us, and amongst those rights is that we protect their property. Amongst those rights is that if they need something, we're there for them. Amongst their rights is that when they are lacking something, we were able to help them in what they're lacking. Amongst those rights is that we check up on them, that we make sure that they're okay. And I'll ask this question not only to my Muslim brothers and sisters, but to everyone sitting here, right? Isn't it important for us as human beings that we have those rights upon one another? That when our neighbor is not doing well, according to our faith, according to the Islamic faith, your neighbor is one of the closest people in the world to you. It's simply, literally, and when it comes to proximity. Growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up, after middle school and high school, none of my neighbors were Muslim. But I have met my neighbors more than I've met most of my extended family. Right? Because when my uncles and aunts or whatever come over, that may be once a year or twice a year or 3 times a year, but I see my neighbors on a daily basis. And even though we don't share, our faith is different, we share so many other things that cause us and help us to live in that harmony. And I remember when one of my neighbors, his name's Dan, he's a retired police officer. And when it comes to the political spectrum, we're on, I wouldn't say completely polar opposite ends of the spectrum, but we disagree. And he's a very staunch, strong Republican, and I fall on the other side of the spectrum. But I remember that he came over and he knocked on our door, and I answered the door and he said, "Hey, I need some help. Can you help me out?" And he was holding some signs in his hand, and I said, "What do you need help with?" And he said, "I need to put up these Bush." This is when the Bush election. He's like, "I need to put up these signs for Bush." And at that moment, there's a choice that I had to make. I was like, well, I don't, I'm not really supporting him right now. But at the same time, this is my neighbor, right? And I believe, and he wasn't trying to put his signs in my yard or anything like that. He's just needed help putting it around where he lives, right? His yard, and I was like, I made the very conscious decision at that point to help him out. And I say, look, I don't agree, but this is I'm helping you because you're my neighbor. I'm helping you because I care about you. I'm helping you because that's your right upon me. And first and foremost, as a Muslim, I have to show him and I have to live my faith, and he has to understand that, look, part of my faith teaches me that I have to help my neighbor when he needs my help. And that is, that's, like I said, that is just a small example of where we need to be as a country. And look, after everything that I said, you can disagree with me, right? And you're welcome, and I invite you to disagree with me. But my message here is that it's fine. As long as we can be good and kind to one another, as long as we can at least make the effort to empathize with one another, then I believe that this is a successful evening, this is a successful event. At the very least, that it makes me so very happy that people have turned out, right? Just to sit together and to break bread together. And some of you may not realize how powerful that is, but that is extremely powerful. Just to sit at a table with someone, just to even say hi to someone. And I'll end with with an incident that occurred with me when I was in Australia. I went to Australia to teach a seminar, and it was like an Islamic course that I was doing. And the hotel that I was staying at, I think I had about 10 floors, and I think I was on the 8th or 9th floor. And I pressed the button, the elevator came, and there was this white Australian couple that was in the elevator. And I was dressed similar to the way I'm dressed right now, you can see. And I get into the elevator, and I spent a fair amount of my life in the South, and there's certain Southern way of doing things that So my immediate instinct was, I said, "Good morning," and they both looked at me like this, and they're like, "Good morning," and I know what was happening in their head. Like I could, like the wheels are turning. They're like, "Wait a minute," right? They didn't say this, but I knew this is what they're thinking. They're like, "Wait a minute. He looks like this, right? He sounds American. We're in Australia. What's happening here?" Right? And I saw them, whatever, and sure enough, by the end of the elevator ride, they're like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "What do you mean?" Right? And that's always my answer, right? And because I'm like, what do you mean? Like, do you mean like ethnically, where am I from? Do you mean where was I born? Where do I live? Because all of those answers are different, right? So I was like, okay, we don't have a lot of time. Originally, my parents are from Pakistan. I was born in Albany, Georgia. I grew up mostly in Maryland. I'm here in Australia visiting, teaching a class. And it's like, they took a step back and they're like, wow, that's not the answer that we expected, right? But that was a moment where I felt like we built a connection. And I know that the next time they see someone like me, or they see someone who is different, who looks different, they're not going to rush to judgment. They're going to be like, wow, there may be more to this person than I get, and that I understand. That's why I actually, people think that, I get that we find that to be annoying or whatever. Some people don't like it when they're like, "Where are you from?" And sometimes people are like, "Oh, what are you trying to say? I look foreign," or whatever. I actually love it, right? Because I get to be like, yeah, let me tell you about myself, and let me tell you about how complex my life is, and how, you can't put me in a nice little category to say, you're from here, and that means you must believe this, and this, and this, and this, and so on and so forth. And like I said earlier, we have to allow one another to have nuanced opinions. We have to allow one another, and we have to understand that we all don't fit in this nice little category, in this box, to say you're this and you're from there. And that's why, one of the things that I often warn the Muslim community about is labels and labeling people. One of the things that I talk about often is how Satan often uses labels to otherize people, right? And sometimes we fall into that trap as well, where it's easy to slap a label on someone and automatically make 100 judgments about who they are and what they believe. And as a human being, that's not fair. And it happens within the Muslim community, it happens outside the communities. I'm sure many of your communities go through this as well. As soon as you label someone, it's like a nice, convenient, easy way to say, yeah, I don't have to talk to you, right? Oh, you're this, oh, you're Republican, or you're this, or you're, you're from the right, or you're from the left, or this, or you're a liberal, you're a conservative, whatever those labels are. And for some people, oh, you're Muslim, right? Oh, you're an immigrant, or you're this, or that, whatever it may be. It's just a very easy and convenient way to say, look, I already know what you're about, and I don't have to care about you, I don't have to talk to you. And that's why, once again, I'm so happy to be a part of this evening, and I want to say thank you to not only the organizers, ICM, but every single one of you who attended and gave me some time out of your day to listen to me, and certainly Allah, God, knows best. Thank you very much. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to all the organizers. You've had a wonderful 24 hours here in your state. It's my first time in Maine. And so this lecture, I was told, was about how being spiritually content can affect those around you, and how being content with your own religion can help to create harmonious societies between within one religion and other religions as well. I'm going to start out with a little story from many, many years ago. When I was first starting medical school, we had we had an orientation for about a week. And one of the activities that we had, an icebreaker, was we had to get together in about groups of 8, and we had to introduce ourselves. And then each one of us had 2 note cards. On one of those note cards, we had to write something that we want to give to each one of our classmates, and then we had to give one of our classmates, each one, something that we want to take from them. So people wrote all different kinds of things, like I want to take from you your ability to laugh, I want to take from you your love for skiing, so many different things. Pretty much like every note card that I got, somebody wrote something about, I want to take your sense of peace from you. I want to take, you seem so happy and content, and I want to take that from you. And that really floored me, but I shouldn't have been surprised actually, because just 4 days before I started medical school, I came back from a 4.5-month journey from Syria, which was my first trip there, and I had sort of a spiritual awakening, a personal spiritual awakening, that came after many, many years of searching for something that I felt was missing on the inside. And what I really, now I can look back and I can say what was really missing was a connection with God, with our Creator. But I didn't really know that. And my story started because you all might be wondering, how did a girl who was born in America, whose parents immigrated from Pakistan in 1970, end up going to Syria to study, right? I mean, sometimes when I think about it, it blows my mind too. How did I end up there? So the way my upbringing was, my family was religious in the sense that we prayed and we fasted. We lived in a small town with about 5 other Muslim families, and we were all very similar, all very good people, but we weren't religious scholars. The women didn't really cover, I don't like to limit women to only wearing the head covering or not, but just as a sort of an outward appearance of faith. That wasn't a part of it. It wasn't a part of the Pakistani culture. When I went away to college, it was the first time that I was around a lot of young people my age who were very active in the Muslim community. There was an MSA, and so I decided to, at that point I had to make a decision. I could have gone out night clubbing like some other people did, and actually some Muslims actually invited me to go night clubbing with them. And I cannot be thankful enough to this day that I did not go, but I had good friends. And so I wanted to learn more and more about my religion by myself. Now, I believe that no matter what religion you are, who you are, and how you were raised, whether you were raised religiously or non-religiously, at some point you have to choose your faith yourself. It's not something that's just, belief is not inherited. Your parents can do a lot to teach you their own faith and their own beliefs, but in the end, when you become an adult, you have to choose yourself. And not only that, you have to choose how you're going to practice. What kind of a Muslim am I going to be? Am I going to be Muslim? I mean, some people ask that too. So in college, I really went through this stage where I wanted to learn more. So I started attending lectures, and I started reading a lot more. I started reading whatever books were available. Now, at that time, there was no internet, so things were very limited. The summer after I graduated in about 3.5 years, I attended a month-long retreat in Winnipeg, Canada. There, it was very spiritually uplifting as well, but what really bothered me was that all the scholars were males. And I saw how the brothers were able to sit with the males, and they were able to learn at a deeper level than we were. There's a certain level of, you have to keep a certain distance, you can't get as close. Like as women, we had some time learning from them, but we didn't go out and play basketball with him, for example, like the brothers were able to. So I really yearned to be able to learn from female scholars. When I ended up, there's a little bit of a longer story in there which I'm going to omit for tonight, but it has to do with medical school. I applied the first time, I was waitlisted, and so then I had like a long time before because then I applied again and I got in, pretty quickly, and I had 8 months then where in between starting medical school and finishing up undergrad. So I decided to use that time to do all different kinds of things that I wouldn't be able to do once I started medical school. So I coached a girls' soccer team at the Islamic school. I took painting classes, drawing classes, and another thing that I did was that I started a correspondence course in Arabic, because to me, getting closer to my faith meant, learn the Arabic language so that I can understand the Quran. So I did all of those things. One part of that story was that there was a friend of mine who was very active in the MSA, and she had spent a year in Syria beforehand learning the Quran. So she came back and she started a class where she started teaching how to recite the Quran properly. I joined this class, but and I was learning from her, but what really hit me the most was I saw that this girl had changed so deeply. Like, to be honest, beforehand, I wasn't that close to her. But when all of a sudden now, I was like, whoa, what happened to you? There's a deep sincerity, there's something inside of you that's so different. And so she talked a lot about her teachers in Syria, and how there was a lot of very knowledgeable women there, scholars. That's how I ended up there. So that's kind of the story how I ended up there, and spent a lot of time, not only then learning Quran, but I found the mentors that I was looking for. I found the strong women who had knowledge and who were well-rounded. So what I really learned from that experience were my fellow medical students. How did they pick up on this? This was something that was deep inside of me. I didn't tell them, hey, I just went and had a spiritual awakening. I feel really comfortable in my religion now. I didn't say anything like that, but they all somehow picked up on it. And so what I really, from that, it was the whole process, and it was a change. And, I learned that day that what's inside of us is really, really powerful. And every one of us, we have to ask ourselves, when it comes to our beliefs, do we feel comfortable? Are we just going along with something? Do we have questions or pins and needles or pricks, but we're not asking them when it comes to our faith? So what I'd recommend is the other thing that I actually learned from that whole experience. When I first sort of embarked on this journey, I went through the phase, that a lot of people might go through when they are making a big change in their life. And a lot of times that might mean giving up things that you used to do. Like, for example, a rock band. I wasn't the leader of a rock band, but, fine, whatever it is. Maybe there's an addiction to music, like listening to music all the time, or, maybe I feel like I need to stop watching so many movies. I have to make better use of my time, whatever it is. But initially, you kind of end up being a little bit strict on yourself, and sometimes you end up being strict on others as well. And there's also this feeling of, I've made so many changes, I like where I am now, and I've given up all these things, but you don't quite feel solid enough to be reintroduced to those things. To be like, I don't want to go back to the same friends I was with before because they were a bad influence on me. Or, kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous. If somebody's trying to give up alcohol, what do? I mean, they really have to just stay away from situations where they're going to be tempted. And that can happen in a lot of people's journeys with their religion as well. But thankfully, there's another stage that comes after that. And I think that's really important for everybody to get to that stage where you feel so solid in your own faith, and you're content with who you are, and other people, it won't bother you to be around people who believe differently, whether it's within your own faith or other faiths. Now, if anything, getting closer to God should make us realize who God is, and He's a merciful God. So why do we think that we can be unmerciful with people around us? And we should learn that as we grow spiritually. That will bring harmony to communities. If we want harmony outside, we need harmony on the inside. So I share that personal story because when I first heard what this talk was supposed to be about, I was like, I kind of went through that, And if we look at examples from the Prophet ﷺ, who is the best of creation, we look at how he dealt with these things too. I mean, he was a prophet. You can't get any better than being a prophet. But how did he treat the people around him? We know the story of when there was a Christian delegation that came from Najran, and it was time to pray. He allowed them to pray in the mosque. If you think about it, there could have been people during that time who would have said, "No, why do you want to pray in the mosque?" But the Prophet ﷺ was merciful, and he allowed them to pray in the mosque. We think about when the Muslims were being persecuted in Mecca, and it got to the point that it was so difficult. And where did he send them? Where did he send the Muslims for safety? He sent them to a Christian community, to Abyssinia. And what did he say about the leader of Abyssinia? He said, "If you were to go to Abyssinia, it would be better for you. For the king will not tolerate injustice, and it is a friendly country, until such time as Allah shall relieve you from your distress." So that's what a spiritually content and solid, stable person, that's the kind of behavior that we expect from them. So if I was to give any advice about how can we become those people who are able to tolerate differences, I would say number one, work on yourself and ask yourself, be content in your own faith. If you have questions, ask them. We're not a faith and that doesn't allow questions to be asked. And once you feel comfortable, then learn more. Find people who have gone through, if it means that you might go through different stages, first of all get knowledge from them and then also learn from them. Have mentors, have good mentors that can kind of keep you grounded so you don't go to the other end. And number three, the journey is not only about knowledge, it's about improving our character. In the end, every religion, what's the goal? Is to be good, kind, generous people. And if we miss out on that point, then we're really missing the whole point.